So in our next half hour, again at the tactical level, I'm pleased to welcome our collaborator on this project, Glynn Tonsor from Kansas State University. Glynn has been working closely with Lee Schultz, economist at Iowa State University. Lee is actually at a National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine workshop downtown today, so he can't be joining us, but this is a shared enterprise between the two of them. It's been a pleasure to work with the economists on this team, along with their graduate students. And Glynn is actually, shortly after we're done here, he's going to be going down to Capitol Hill and providing some expert testimony to both the Senate and the House Ag committees, hopefully spreading the message of biosecurity across the gamut. So we're really appreciative to have economists of the caliber of Glynn and Lee associated with this project. So, Glynn, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. First and foremost, yes, Lee would have given this presentation, but he's not available. The pro for you in the room is you get more purple showed to you instead of Iowa State red, so that's a good thing. I always interject fun K-State points, and it's a bias group. There's a couple of you here. You will see some purple here. These slides I'm actually going to show you at the end where they're already available, and I believe they're going to be on our general website at some point as well. I note that because a couple things I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. If you need more information, you're welcome to come to them. What I want to do here briefly is set the situation as it relates to the swine industry, the economics of biosecurity investment, and in short, there's not enough information to understand how producers, I'm saying producers in general, right, the production side of the swine industry, make decisions, and how that does or doesn't align with what public animal health officials want to do. Both those groups sit on different amounts of information. We need to understand that, and at the heart of it is there's different incentives to make investments and to share information. And one of the things that is really missing is what I would call empirical assessment of the producer decision making. So in the ag econ geeky academic literature, there's a lot of conceptual models in this space, but there's not too many that are applied actual producer decision making assessments. And Lee and I collectively are trying to contribute to that in this grant. So I'm going to speak to a swine survey and the subsequent work that comes with it. So back in early 2017, Lee led the charge on this. It's a nationally representative swine industry survey. Here's a picture of the report. Basically, there's a whole bunch of summary statistics, and you can call it benchmarking of perceptions that is in that resource. If that's of value to you, I encourage you to go to it. We're going to dive deeper into analysis beyond just summary stats, but I will highlight that is there. Many of those kind of things didn't exist before. So perceptions on likelihood of a tier 1 disease, how long I'm going to be, unable to sell my hogs if I have tier 1 disease, and those kind of things show up in that report. Okay. I'm going to drive two empirical findings home here in our short time today, and I want to hear from you guys. One was we examined policy expectations of U.S. hog producers, and the specific policy was indemnity. Now, real briefly for our listeners or those in the room that aren't quite familiar, at least traditionally, the U.S. government, when they take your animals in the spirit of animal disease control, there's an indemnification process that comes with that. It's changed over time, and I won't bore us with how that works, but that's what I'm referring to here as an indemnity policy. What we found was producers are very diverse in their expectations of that policy. Roughly a third expect no indemnity payment. Roughly a third think they'll get an indemnity payment regardless of their biosecurity investment. And roughly a third think their payment will be conditioned on whether they have biosecurity in place or not before. I think that variation is a result of this is opinion. I can't prove this, it's just opinion, so I'll give you the disclaimer, is the high path experience where USD had to change or chose to change how the indemnification process worked and asked for biosecurity protocols to be in place and documented and so forth has led to some of this discussion, and I can't help but think the swine industry is aware of some of that. Also, public budgets are constrained, and there's probably some recognition that resources will be constrained if we have a big disease event, leads to that diverse set of expectations. So first and foremost, those diverse expectations on indemnification exist. What's on this chart is kind of the so what of that point. So one of the things that Lee and I did was what we call an economic choice experiment, where we walk producers through under what conditions would you or would you not make an additional biosecurity investment. So as we change the cost of implementing, as we change the risk reduction benefit of implementing and things like that, how does that change your, what I'm going to call adoption rate, so your willingness to invest? The blue bar here is simply the on average, if you use the mean levels of cost, mean level of risk reduction, and so forth, you get about 62% adoption rate if we ignore this indemnification expectation diversity. So that's the average across them all. The green bar that stands out is the one that corresponds with the roughly 1/3 of producers that think they're going to operate in an arena where indemnification is going to be conditioned on them having biosecurity in place and being able to document it. And it shouldn't be surprising that that is the group that would have a higher adoption rate if that's what they expect, because they think their governmental payment will be conditioned and rewarded, if you like, based upon that. That difference is not just statistically different, it shows up in economically relevant terms that are important. So that's my first kind of key point to highlight. The second point is that same exercise allows us to project adoption rates or investment rates across different scenarios. And what I have here is a simple one. As we change the cost of biosecurity, all else equal, as you increase the cost you're asking producers to pay, they're going to adopt less. That's why all these lines are downward sloping as you move left to right. But notice those three lines don't have the same slope. Moreover, the green line is above it at all points. The green line corresponds with the green bars on the last slide. So at all cost, producers expect a conditional indemnity will adopt more. But what I really want to highlight here is the fact those slopes are different. Those that expect a conditional biosecurity indemnification policy are actually the ones most sensitive and responsive to cost. Turn that around, if we can manage to, whether it's policies to cost share or just R&D that reduces the cost of implementing, the producers I anticipate to adopt first, the ones that will be most sensitive to that reduction in the cost, are the ones that are operating in the mindset of a conditional indemnification policy. I'm building the argument why socially there might be more reasons to have a conditional indemnification policy and clarify that diversity of expectations maybe towards that if that was a new policy. There's probably some benefits on the adoption rate that would follow. So those are my punchlines, basically, those first 2 points. Beyond the indemnification differences, so even if you ignore that, it's further important to recognize that swine producers, and we find this with ag producers in many circles, are more sensitive to the cost, what it's going to take for me to implement something, than they are the stated risk reduction benefit. And it shouldn't be surprising, this is a Tonsor opinion of why you find that, is the cost is somewhat certain. I know I got to write a check for $1 million, I know that. The risk benefit is up for debate depending on what we're talking about, what scientific expert you talk to and so forth. And that probably gives them some pause and they put more faith, if you like, in the cost benefit than they do the risk benefit, to the tune of 2 to 7 times more important. So a 1% reduction in cost gets you a much bigger change in investment rate than a 1% improvement on risk efficacy, and to the tune of a 2 to 7 times magnitude. What are the implications of that? Cost share policies might be worth thinking about, or R&D that's targeting the implementation cost might make more sense at the margin than new approaches that are more risk effective. We operate in a world where it's nice and sexy to talk about new tools, and there's room for that. But at the margin, those same resources might be better off targeting reducing adoption cost rather than developing something new that's targeting a more effective risk-reducing approach. The third thing that's up here, it's just a reminder for me to briefly say it, is we also find that any kind of premium that could exist in the private market, and in this context would be a hog packer who might be paying for your hogs differently than your hogs. If I know you have a biosecurity system in place and therefore you have a clean system, we find those signals work quite well. I highlight that because for the most part to date, the U.S. livestock industry, not just the swine industry, but the livestock industry, doesn't have many premiums and discounts in the biosecurity space. One could envision it. We have premiums and grids on meat quality and other production practice aspects, but not necessarily disease. That day might be coming. And I'm just highlighting that because this work is useful even if you don't see a place for all our policy suggestions. There's an inner private market conclusion benefit to that as well. Potentially the buying community, which would be packers and processors, could send private signals to encourage adoption. I'll remind you, I noted this general fact sheet. I think it's useful for those of you that haven't seen it, go to it. And to motivate it, I was going to give you 2 simple things that are there to kind of bait you to go to it. These are example tables that are in that resource. So for example, we ask these producers, over the next 100 years, how many times do you think a tier 1 disease is going to occur? This is a broad proxy for what's their perception of the risk. I'll highlight that 9% don't think it'll ever happen, all the way down to 10% think more than 6 times. Don't go any further. There's a wide diversity of risk expectations out there, is the point. Therefore, it shouldn't surprise us there's mixed willingness to implement biosecurity. There's more stuff like that in that report I encourage you to make use of. As I said, I've already posted this online at this page. It'll be on our general website. And I'll give credit to our grant again. This is my standard last slide. Thank you, Julie, for having me on in general. And I tried to be brief so we can take some questions. So thank you.
So Glynn, what are some thoughts that you have about next steps? What are the next questions that we can ask along these directions? How do you start answering some of these policy questions that you've alluded to? What's the next step?
So a lot of what I very briefly highlighted was the producer decision to make the initial or an additional biosecurity investment. Like there's policy components and what I'll call private market signals we can talk about for that. But throughout the duration of the grant, we've also talked about compliance once you implement something. And a couple of the talks earlier were alluding to compliance as well. It would apply here also. So to use simple examples that folks think about is simply having a truck wash is maybe part of the solution, but making sure that the temperatures are right, every trailer goes in it for the right amount of time, and those kind of things are versions of pragmatic, details that need to continue. That one's probably easier to deal because it's a really expensive thing to implement that compliance may not be broke as much. Where it gets harder is things like the shower in, shower out. Are we doing it for the right way and for the right length and so forth? Long way of telling you, I think more work in the compliance space. What can we do to help monitor and incentivize ongoing compliance once there's been an initial investment? For the academics in the room that can relate to this, universities struggle with a different version of this. It's easier to find resources to build something than it is to maintain it. That's the parallel we're talking about here. The initial investment is different than the maintenance budget.
Glynn, hi. Reagan Adams, Colorado State University. In the world of natural disasters, individuals' decision-making is often affected by what they've seen on the news or what's happened in their community. Can you expand a little bit more when we're talking about livestock or livestock producers on how you think they feel when they hear about something happening, like how effective? We certainly know that the pork producer associations are worried about African swine fever, but what do you think of pork producers thinking about? And similarly, how we beat the drum about foot and mouth disease. Are they numb to that, or do they really need something, trotting over from Mexico to get in the game?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I don't have the 3 weeks necessary to answer it completely. But most importantly, I think that varies a lot across industries. And in a moment, I'm going to be asked to speak about something in the beef cattle industry. And I'm going to make a quick comparison there compared to the swine industry, is the information flow and the different levels of ownership, how many times a given animal changes ownership from birth to slaughter is very different. And that quickly changes the economic reality of any of those kind of shocks. So that's first and foremost a broad reaction. So the economic relevance of those situations is very different for those two industries because of that. I also think the swine industry, as we're talking about here, does a good job, collectively speaking. The communication experts in the room can speak more to this, of quite proactively having a plan in place to respond, and at least on balance is not sending mixed messages. I'm not an expert to score them per se, but as somebody that's watching it and talking to other producers, I think there's a fairly coherent message that's occurring there. That has to help. The other one, which you brought up, African swine fever, this is geeky, but it'll make my point. Since March 1st, there's been over a $35 swing per hundredweight on summer hog prices. First, a big run up in hope that we would export a lot more to China because of their African swine fever considerations and our potential to export more. And then a fair amount of that gain has been given up more recently in the last few weeks. I won't give you a full market outlook talk. That's not the point of your question. But the relevance of that is anybody that's following prices on their bottom line, they're getting constant shocks every day in the marketplace about what future hog prices will probably do. And there's lots of discussion that's tied to the disease situation somewhere else. So they have to be thinking about it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate you being willing to talk outside here.
I try.
Just say your name and hold it. Okay. Deanna Selnall, University of Central Florida. I'm really interested in that slide you had up there with the perceptions about in the next 100 years.
Go ahead.
the next 100 years, how many times they thought there would be a disease outbreak, and then also how many months it would take to recover the losses or to mitigate the harm. And I'm wondering if you calculated mean scores and how that might compare to what the experts say how often it's likely to occur and how long it's likely to take to mitigate the harm.
So we have a few of those experts in the room if they want to chime in. But I would give us caution on even making that comparison because there's more than one tier 1 disease. So the way this is framed is, tier 1 disease is if you want, just the most catastrophic. African swine fever is one of them, but it's not the only one.
Right.
And therefore, the likelihood of 2 diseases is probably not the same. The duration is not the same and so forth. So I would give us pause on purposely comparing this with the expert community, if you like, because the expert community is going to want to know which of those diseases.
And also we need to qualify what this is really telling us then if there's more than one tier 1 disease and we only asked tier 1 in a general sense.
Now, the broad response to now kind of defend why we did it this way, one of the benefits of biosecurity as opposed to vaccine X is vaccine X targets a specific issue. And I'm going to be careful not to pick on a particular disease or a product, but biosecurity is a hedge on multiple risk. So in that context, I'm going to defend for this grant.
Okay.
It's biosecurity-oriented human behavior to make biosecurity investments. Looking at catastrophic diseases in a broader sense is perfectly acceptable. As soon as you try to say our producer's irrational or out of touch with the experts, then we've got to get more specific, and I would give us, I don't think you want to do that here.
Okay.
That's why I responded the way I did.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.